Hi, my name's Nat and today we're going to be cooking one pan curry made of mushrooms, potatoes and aubergines. So wash your hands, tiny long hair back, and let's get started. So I like to start by putting the pan on about 4, like medium heat, adding a little bit of olive oil to your pan just to let it heat up a bit. And then putting an uncrushed, uncut garlic clove in. Maybe give it a little stir around before it gets too hot, just to let it sort of bask in the juices. And by the time that heats up, hopefully some of the garlic will have infused into the oil as well. So next you're going to cut your onion. Cut off the bottom and the top, because that makes it a lot easier to peel that way. So you want to peel away all the dead skin, so you're left with something nice and sort of beautiful and shiny, like this top bit here. Once you've cleared that away, you're gonna cut the onion in half, like that, and you can just use your knuckle to the blade, and then just chop the onion. You can go as slow or as fast as you like, it doesn't really matter. And then turn it to the side and chop it the other way. Like this is a bit more difficult, so I have nails, I like doing it like that. Or you can just rough chop it as well, which is just when you sort of you're a bit sort of like not careless with it, but you're not as precise or not as neat, so you can just do that. And then once your pan is nice and ready, not too hot, you put all the onion in and you stir it around with your garlic clove. Okay, while you're continuously stirring your pan next to you, you should get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 small potatoes washed. We're going to leave the skin on, which is why it's important to make sure they're washed. Or 1.5 big potatoes. It's completely up to you. It depends on how much potato you want in this curry. So I want sort of like a lot, but I didn't have big potatoes, so I used these little ones instead. And we're not going to do anything like fancy with them or anything. You're just going to cut them into like bite-sized chunks like that to add in once the onion is frying for a little bit longer. So just maybe like into quarters. You know, it's completely up to you, because these are sort of, maybe that's a bit too big, mouthfuls for you. So something like that, really. Okay, so you'll know it's time to put your potatoes and your aubergine and your mushrooms in the pan once you see sort of some of the red onions start to become see-through, or in cases like this one, you see a little bit of browning on the edge. Sometimes you might need to add a little bit more oil, that's okay. You can see this is sort of starting to run dry, and because I'm about to add a lot more things, I'll probably need to top up the oil a little bit. And give that a good mix around. Okay, at this point all you want to do is add your potatoes so that they soften first, but you also might want to put the kettle on for the stock, which we'll be adding in a bit. Next you are going to be chopping your aubergine, so you can chop the top off here. I like to use the bottom, so I'm going to chop it off, but that's still going to be used, so I'm going to put it to the side. And then I chop it into chunks like these. You can use this if you want to be a bit more steady about it. And just like with the potatoes, you're going to want to chop these into chunks that are going to be manageable for you. So I like to quarter them, because it's a lot easier for me that way. You can leave them sort of this size. It depends on how big your bites are going to be, really. But yeah. Now, once you check that your potatoes are softened, and you can check them by just sticking them with a fork and seeing if they're soft, you should be able to add your chopped mushrooms. Now, the thicker you make your mushrooms, the better, because mushrooms shrink when they are put on heat. So if you like thick mushrooms, then you will love the size of these. Use 250 grams, which is usually a whole box. There's no hard and fast rule to cutting mushrooms. You just have to cut them however you can, really. So I like to cut them upside down because I find it a lot easier to control the stem from there. Otherwise sometimes it sticks out and it's a bit awkward. These ones seem hard. I think it's because they're a little bit frozen from being in the back of my fridge too long. There we go. Here you should have around 70 millilitres of veggie stock. I adjusted it later. And then what I like to do is add my curry powder to the stock before I pour it over the pan. So I don't like it very spicy, so I'm only going to use about 2 tablespoons. Obviously I would use a proper measurement, but this is a bit clumpy and I don't want to put it inside. So there we go. Around 2 tablespoons there. And then mix it all up. And then once you've done that, we're going to pour it into the pan, and then on top of that we are going to put in 400 millilitres of low-fat coconut milk. Don't worry if the mixture doesn't seem like it's a lot. It's going to obviously get a lot bigger once you add your coconut milk. There we go. And you don't have to use this brand. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just that I bought the one without a ring pull on it, so yeah, maybe get those ones, they're a lot easier to work with, but there you go. And once that's together, you want to give it a nice mix. If there's any spices that you want to add, I would recommend adding them in a liquid before you pour it over, which is why I added the curry powder to the stock before I put it in. So at that point you could add cumin, you could add turmeric, which has loads of health benefits to it. A lot of curry powders will already have it. Some will ask you to use curry pastes instead. I prefer curry powder. And I would have put turmeric in this one to make it nice and yellow, but I am planning on eating this with some turmeric rice, which is the next recipe. So I didn't feel the need to put any turmeric in this particular curry. So once that's all nice and mixed together, we're gonna bring it to a simmer, and then once it starts simmering, I'm gonna get a nice big lid, and that is some onion that I dropped earlier. And then I'm gonna get a nice big lid and cover it so it simmers and all the excess juices condense, and then they sort of disperse, and then you're left with a nice thicker curry. If by the end you realise it's not as thick as you want, then I would add some cornstarch, which I forgot to do on camera, but I did do later. Okay, that's simmering now. You can't really see it, but there's just tiny bubbles sort of in the middle, and they're going to spread around in a minute. So that's nice and hot pretty much. I'm going to put this lid over. It doesn't quite fit, but that's just me. Please make sure you use a lid that does fit, or at least try and get as much of the liquid under the lid as possible. And then at this point you're going to reduce your heat, so if you're a 4, reduce it down to a 2 or something. If you're at 3 like I am, I'm going to keep it on 3 for about around 40 minutes. If you don't feel comfortable with that, then I'd recommend keep it on for 20 minutes, go in, check, see how thick it is, and then leave it on for another 20 minutes. And then it should be done. If after 20 minutes you see that your curry isn't quite as thick as you want it, then I'd recommend just taking the lid off and leaving it off and letting it openly simmer. It should thicken up easier that way, but like I said earlier, at the end you can always add a little bit of cornstarch to thicken it up. Hi, my name's Nat. Today we're going to be making brown turmeric rice. So first things first, wash your hands, tie your hair back, and let's begin. So you're going to start off with 2 cups, which is roughly 450 millilitres of vegetable stock, and you're going to pour it into a pan, hopefully without spilling it like I did. There you go. Then you're going to add 1 cup of brown rice. I'm just going to add it in there. Give it a good mix around. And then you're going to add 2 tablespoons of turmeric powder. 1 and then 2. I know it seems like a lot, but it's just to get a real yellow flavour for the rice. So then you're going to give it another good stir around, get that all incorporated. Hopefully you don't have any lumps. Should look a bit like that, like a little bit like carrot soup or something. And then you should have it on medium heat, and then once this starts to boil, we're going to put a lid on and then put it on a simmer so the rice can cook properly. Okay, once that's nice and bubbling, as you can see here, you're going to turn it from like a 4 down to a 2. And we're going to gently put a cover on it. Make sure that you leave enough room for a lot of the steam to escape, otherwise there's going to be a lot of bubbles. If you still feel like it's bubbling a bit too much, you can turn it back down to 1 if you want. And now we're just going to let this simmer for 50 minutes. Okay, once your timer is up, then you're just going to take the lid off, turn the heat right off, and immediately, really quickly, hit it with a bit of olive oil, just a tiny little splash, and some black pepper. If you don't like black pepper, you can do it without, that's perfectly fine, but it really brings out the taste of the turmeric and helps to improve some of the benefits of turmeric, and there are many, believe me. Ooh. And you're just going to give that like a really quick stir around, get it all oiled and peppered and whatever. But it's really good to add the black pepper if you feel like it, because it brings out the turmeric, and it's also better to do that because then the turmeric will sort of absorb better, and it has loads of health benefits. Like it helps with inflammations, it helps with your immune system, it's linked to reducing heart problems and maybe cholesterol as well. I'd highly recommend doing a little bit of research, but generally turmeric is all around good stuff. So once you've oiled it and black peppered it, just put the lid back on for around 10 more minutes just to let it all settle and absorb, and then you're done. Hi, I'm Nat. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make chamomile and orange cake. First things first, wash your hands, tie back any long hair. Let's begin. So that's how we're going to start, is making sure you have all the ingredients. So I'm going to start off by weighing some of my plain flour. There you go. We need 282 grams. Next we have the sugar, and it's in a different bowl because you're going to mix them both at different times and then eventually add them together. But for now, in this bowl, we're going to be mixing the sugar and the butter. So we'll weigh out the sugar first. It should weigh 226 grams, or roundabout, not that picky. There we go. That's 226 according to my scale. And then once you've done that, just put it to the side. So while you're weighing your butter, you might as well chop it into sort of smaller pieces like this, and then put it in your little bowl, but make sure this little bowl fits on top of your little saucepan like that. You don't want it touching the bottom. This is how we're going to be melting the butter. So just put all your sort of little pieces, maybe break them into chunks if you want to. Something like this isn't very good because it's so big that it won't melt properly. So you just want to kind of cut it carefully with a butter knife into smaller chunks. Or like I said before, if you want to sort of just rip it into pieces, it's great to give a child something to do because it'll definitely keep them occupied for a few minutes. The shape of the butter doesn't really matter because it's all just going to get melted. You're just making it smaller so that it melts easier, really. There we go. And then of course you want to put your milk in a measuring jug. It should be, I don't know if you can see that, it should be around 500 milliliters. It's okay if it's a little bit less, not as much if it's a bit more, but you might want to do this in a few minutes time. I only did it for the camera, but obviously it's best to keep the milk in the fridge. So what I like to do first is grab your little pan, put it on the stove around medium, so maybe like a 4 if you've got a stove like I do, and you're going to add some boiling water just to get it to kind of heat up faster. Not too much, not too little. You just want sort of all the steam from this boiling water, so maybe around up to your knuckle worth of water. I'll show you in a second. There we go. So around that much water. I don't know how clear it is to see. And then once it's properly boiling, so once you get quite a lot of steam rising up, What you're going to do is turn the heat down a little bit, and then you're going to add your butter in your nice little bowl. You're going to put it on top, and that's how we melt the butter. So if you're like me and you're a little bit impatient, while you're waiting for your water to boil, you can measure out some baking powder and some salt and add it to your dry mixture. So we only need 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and it's definitely baking powder and not baking soda, which is completely different. So, you know, grab it out. It doesn't have to be level. Like, it helps if it's not too high, but that's around 1. So sprinkle that in there. And then you don't want to put too much. So if you think it's too much, then, you know, empty out a little bit. But try and get it as accurate as you can. I do have these measuring sort of spoons, and this is 1 tablespoon, but I lost the teaspoon one, so I'm using an actual teaspoon, but it might not be as accurate. Anyway, so this time we're adding salt. So there's not a lot of salt to add because we don't want it to be very salty. So if you just grab like literally a pinch of salt, you know, nothing more than this, and just sprinkle it around, maybe like a couple pinches of salt. There we go. And that's all done. And then you want to give it a really good mix together. Make sure it's all incorporated in there. As you can see, the water's boiling. It's pretty hot. So I'm going to turn the temperature down a little bit, so from 4 to 3, and then I'm going to add my butter bowl. I'm just going to put it on top like that. Now, sometimes if it's too hot, there'll be like a lot of steam coming out, so you'll need to turn it down in that case. But like this, the butter should melt, you know, not very long, maybe 5 minutes maximum. You can keep it stirring if you want. I would use like a little spatula like this or something, but I wouldn't worry too much about it because you're going to be incorporating it in with your sugar that you measured in earlier in about less than a minute. Now, if you see little lumps like here, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it at all. Be really careful when you take the bowl off the pot. So what I would do is turn the heat off completely, maybe wait for it to cool for a bit, or if you want, it might be a lot easier to just take like oven mitts and then take it off like that and just leave it to rest for a couple of minutes. While you're making sure the bowl's not too hot, it's actually great that this pan is hot because we're going to be reusing it. So because it's only had water in it, it doesn't really need to be washed. You can if you want to. I'm choosing not to. So I'm going to pour this water in the sink. I'm going to turn the heat back on to about 3 just for now. And now you're going to get your milk out of the fridge and you're going to pour it in. So make sure the pan's not too hot for this because you don't want it to curdle right away. But just put the milk in, and then we're going to put 4 or 5 chamomile tea bags in. So I like these ones because they're kind of strong. This is a point where you can decide how strong you want your cake to be. So I like the taste of chamomile quite a lot, so I'm going to put 5 tea bags in. But if you want quite a mild taste, but it for like just enough to pick it up, it'll be about 4 tea bags instead. So what you're really doing here is we're putting the tea bags in and sort of letting it slowly. Okay, you can hear the hissing because I accidentally dropped some milk. Don't worry about it. But the reason we're doing this is so that the tea bags can really infuse into the milk. So you don't need to press them or anything because they're going to infuse on their own. So maybe give it a mix around and make sure that the temperature is not too hot. You don't want to boil this milk. So we're going to leave that for about 7 or 8 minutes. Keep a close eye on it. But for now, your bowl of butter should have cooled down a little bit better. And we're just going to slowly add that to the sugar and properly mix it about, which I will do once I have 2 hands. Now, if you have a stand mixer, then you want to put this on like medium to high to get it sort of light and fluffy. But if you're by hand, it might take a little while. So hopefully, by the time you make this into a light and fluffy mixture, your chamomile milk should be done. Now we're going to add the eggs. You should have 2 large eggs, and they should be in date. And the best way to check if they're in date is to drop one in a little glass of water, and if it floats, it means it's bad. If it sinks to the bottom, it means it's good. So I tested these earlier, and they're fine. You want to make sure that they're room temperature, not fridge eggs, and then you're just going to add one at a time, a whole egg, and then whisk them one at a time. And here's the second egg. Now at this point, maybe what you want to do is keep another eye on your chamomile milk. If you think it's ready, if you can smell it, then maybe take it off the heat. And I would start preheating your oven pretty much now. You can do that at the beginning. It's completely up to you, depending on how fast your oven is. I forgot to set mine at the beginning, but generally it's kind of slow. So yeah, now is a good time to preheat your oven. Also, make sure you don't get any bits of eggshell in your cake. And if you do, then just pick it out with a fork or something. Once it starts looking something like this, then you want to add your vanilla extract, which is about 1 teaspoon. So that was around a teaspoon. If you want, you can put more in. I would go on the side of less, just because vanilla extract is a lot stronger than you think it is. And also, if you have a little helper with you, you might give them the task of taking the chamomile tea bags out of the milk at this point. Okay, so if you think your milk is cool enough, then shake off all the excess batter. And now you want to fold your flour mixture in instead of whisk it, because if you whisk it, there's going to be a lot more air incorporated into it, and that's not what we want because it's quite a moist, dense cake. So grab your sieve, which I have put down somewhere, and oh, there. Sorry. You want to grab your sieve and pour a little bit of the flour mixture over. You've got to make sure you sieve it, otherwise you get loads of clumps, and that is not what you want. And then gently sort of powder it on. And then once you've got what you think is enough, because you're going to be the one doing the folding, you just kind of scrape the sides and sort of push it toward the middle. Feel free to change direction at any point. You're just trying to fold it in, getting all the flour there. And it might start to feel a bit stiff. So at that point you would add the milk. So you have to add the milk and the flour and the milk and the flour instead of adding all the milk and then all the flour, because it incorporates a lot better. The ingredients come together a lot better that way. Okay, so in the time lapse you might see me whisking it a bit. It's because the flour, I added it too much at one point, so there's quite a lot of lumps in it because it didn't incorporate properly. Now I have sort of fixed it by whisking. If you see any lumps, just squish them against the side because that's all the flour and you don't want your mixture to be lumpy. I did have to use the whisk, but because I'm using such small motions, it shouldn't have that much air in it. But when we pour it into the oiled cake tin, as we're about to, you can just tap it on the surface a few times, sort of like this, just to get all the air bubbles to rise to the top and come out. Okay, so now you want to sort of put your whisk to the side, and you want to grab your spatula thing from earlier, and make sure that there's no flour on the edges that you're going to use. So my bowl has a sort of dip either side, so you can pour it out, and just evenly pour about half into this one, nice greased cake tin, and then half into another one. And I like using this because it gets all of the batter out of the bowl that you've used, which means you don't waste a lot. Alternatively, if you have a little one, they can lick it clean for you. It's pretty much custard at this point, but it's really tasty custard. So there you go. Once you've poured them into your cake mixtures, once you've poured the cake mixtures into your greased cake pans, just give it a few bangs on the table or the counter to make sure that any air bubbles come to the top, and then they'll pop, and then you won't have a airy cake, shall we say. Once you've done that, put them in the oven. You should have preheated your oven to around 170 degrees. and then you're going to put these in for around 45 minutes. Once they're in, do some washing up. We'll use this bowl and whisk again for the icing, and have fun cleaning. Once you've taken your cakes out of the oven, put the fan on and let them dry. I've turned it off so that you can hear what I'm saying. And just grab like a chopstick, preferably a metal one, and just poke it. So it should come clean all the way through. I'm going to check the corners, so that might not be done, but hopefully it'll set when it dries. And then there's this one. Maybe get a fresh chopstick, or alternatively just turn it around. All good? Okay, once you've measured out your icing sugar, you should have a small bowl of butter at room temperature, and it should be around 113 grams of butter, and you should have around 250 grams of icing sugar. So what you're going to do is you're going to add the butter to the icing sugar and mix it with a whisk until it's a really nice consistency. It should look a little something like this. So when it does, you just want to add a little bit of orange juice, depending on how orangey you want the... There we go, that should be enough. And then you mix it thoroughly. Add a drop of vanilla extract. There we go. And of course, another little pinch of salt. So I've given it a little taste and I realised it wasn't quite strong enough, so I'm just going to add a little bit more orange juice. Not too much because it's already pretty moist. And then I'm going to mix it, and then I'm going to put it on the cake. Okay, so what I've done is I've put one cake on top of the other, and I've put it onto a Tupperware lid. So I've made sure that it's, you know, within the lines, and eventually after I do the frosting, I can simply put the box on top like that, and it acts as like a sort of cake protector. So now we're just going to put the icing on the cake, as heavy or as little as you want. Now I'm going to add some of my favourite toppings. I've put it quite thin on because I don't like thick frosting, but what you can do is you can put this in the fridge overnight, and then when it's dry you can add more frosting later.